Welcome to Maya Dynamics Level 2, Week 8. Today we're going to, I was saying to the guys in the live session, we're going to wrap up, I hope, the conversation about fluids, which took us about 8 weeks to get to this point. There's a few random things here and there that are missing that I haven't talked about, and I'm going to try to cover as many. If we don't finish that today, we'll do it in the next class. And also, I want to answer some questions that looks like they're coming through the live session. So first things first. So you guys are going first. Darius, you had the question about how can we optimize the render times. If you want, Darius, if you want to type on the chat window any particular concern that you have, then as I go blah blah blah, you can always put more stuff there. But if I understood you correctly, you say that you want to know what can you do to speed up a little bit your renders because they are taking awful long at the moment. Am I on the right? Yeah. Okay. So can you tell me, if you remember the top of your head, can you tell me please how many voxels you're dealing with? If you know, if not, then just give me a guesstimate of just to get an idea. And if you can also tell me a little bit what kind of computer you're using. It will be great as well. It's best if you type it, your answer, because you could get a bit noisy on the line. Fluid of fire, yep. And yeah, let's see how many. If you remember roughly how many voxels you're using, and what kind of computer you have, particularly processor and RAM. The rest is not a problem. Video card is not important. Computer is an i7, that's fine. How much RAM do you have, if you remember? Okay, and how many voxels roughly is your simulation? This could be happening to most of you. I know that, I think it was, who was it? There was one of my students, I remember that he was very angry about how slow the fluid apparently were rendering, but we'll see. We'll see what we can do. So, alright, so I still don't know how many voxels you have, because the amount of voxels is the most important thing. I'm going to open, let me open Maya and let me open my fire and we can talk about it. So I believe we did fire on week 6, sorry. There you go. Alright, so this fire right here, it has, let me count myself, okay? So let's just take a comparison. So we're talking about, what, 5,000 times 250. So let's do 500 times 250 times 100. So I have 12.5 million voxels on mine. Okay, let's see. I don't think I have this fluid cache. I'm gonna let it run a little while I come back and check what you're writing here. Okay, so you're giving me four values here. Well, it should be 3. So I'm guessing it's 200 by 50 by 30, right? So yours is. This is one way to kind of get an idea how long you're gonna have to wait for things. So it should be. I'm assuming yours is 200 by 50 by 30, I think. So you have only 300,000 frames. And how long is it taking for you at the moment for one frame to render it? Because sometimes the perception of time, or what it seems to be slow for some, might not be for others. Like I've been waiting for fluid renders at high resolutions for a whole day for one frame. It could happen. I mean, it's not ideal, but it could happen. 117 frames, more than 8 hours. Yeah, that seems a bit high for the number of voxels that you have, because the number of voxels is very low. If I did this correctly, okay, if it's in the 200 by 50 by 30, right? If that's correct, I don't know. If I made a mistake here, then correct me, please. But If this is just that, all right, so it's only 300,000 voxels, it shouldn't take that long. So I'm gonna tell you a few things I can say about the rendering. You're rendering with Mentor Ray? Okay. Right, so the Mentor Ray settings you're using, I'm not aware of, so be careful with things like, for example, you need to have ray tracing turned on, yes, to get the shadows to work. But as far as your ray tracing settings, they shouldn't be high in any way. You only need to have ray tracing on, that's it. But you shouldn't have to worry too much about too many samples and things like that, okay? Things like final gathering, okay, global illumination, those things can make it very slow. So keep an eye on that. I mean, try to reduce that as much as possible. Also, I just only have 6 frames in here. I'm gonna keep talking a little bit more, but motion blur, okay, is another important thing. One thing also, sorry, before I go any further, are you caching this fluid, or are you going? Oh, wait a minute. You're saying now that the render is very fast. So what is it slow? The simulation itself. I'm thinking that you were talking about the renders were very slow. The render of 300,000 voxels shouldn't be slow at all, honestly. It should be. That's the kind of stuff I do in class, for example. That's the kind of number of voxels that I'm doing in class. So it should be similar to what I do here. I was going to ask you, my next question was that. It's actually, are you simulating and rendering at the same time, or are you caching the fluid and then rendering? Caching takes about 8 hours. All right, that's also very, 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 very slow. Are you using collisions? I mean, there's so many factors that come into play in here. How is your emission? What are you using for emission of fluids? Is important, So if you're emitting fluids based on expressions, for example, on particles, that can get slow. But if it's just a regular emitter, it shouldn't be this slow. If you have collisions, it can get slow, but not that slow. About 8 hours for 300,000 voxels, fluid only. Well, it's a bit tricky. To say. I thought we were talking about rendering. So rendering wise, anyway, just to finish my thought on that, your settings on Mentor Ray. I'm gonna pause mine. Okay, so mine, I only did 9 frames. I don't know how much density I'm going to have in the screen. But I am simulating 12.5 million voxels at the moment, okay, at home here. So I don't know how long it took me to say the things that I just said, but we did 10 frames in that amount of time. It's not going to get slower because my container is set size, okay? It's not going to get slower as time goes by. Unless I introduce forces or collisions or something. But in my case, this fluid is just going to rise. The amount of time that it takes to do those frames is going to be the same throughout. So I can kind of estimate by seeing just these 10 frames, I can kind of get an idea how long it's going to take to do the rest. I'm trying to stop. Let me see if I can stop this. Come back to Maya. No real flow, sorry. Just trying to kill my Maya here to stop the simulation, but it's still stuck on the Adobe Connect window. I'll try to grab something else. Okay, come on, stop it. In the meantime, while this is going through, if the simulation is slow, hard to say. I mean, make sure that your solver settings, okay, the solver quality, that I usually bump up to 60 or 120. Make sure you didn't put an extra 0 by mistake, for example. Okay. But there is not much, honestly. If you are is this a resizable container that you're using? There is. Let me go back and check with you here. Is it a resizable container, or is it a set size like the one I have? No. Well, I mean, that doesn't make any sense. It's taking so long. There might be something else in your scene probably that is causing that. Because I can make right now a 300,000 voxel container and it will be fine. To simulate it will be very fast. You can see what it takes to do 12.5 million, so it shouldn't be. So probably if there's something else in your scene that is probably slowing it down, some sort of piece of geometry with history, I don't know exactly. I mean, I will have to see the scene if you want, okay? But because it's hard to debug it from remotely like this. If you want, why don't you email me your scene file? I'll open it up. I'll check it out. If you do it right now, we might be able even to open it in class, in the same class. So try to send me that scene if you don't mind, and I'll check it out. Okay? I think that will be more effective, because otherwise I'm just guessing things. I can tell you a few items that could be wrong, but send me the scene and I'll take a look at it. Just let me know when you do, and I'll open it up. Given that that's just about the rendering, I was trying to kill Maya, but I'm gonna have to probably kill it because I can't come and access it again here. Oh, maybe not. Let's give this one more chance. But yeah, rendering wise, I like to render with RenderMan. So those of you who have access to RenderMan, try to get it. Okay, try to. I think the student versions of RenderMan are very cheap to buy. So give those a try. It's way faster, and the look is much better than what Mentor can do. I keep using Mentor in class because I know that all of you have it. If you have Maya, you have Mentor. So. But try to get your hands onto a different engine. But yeah, your ray tracing settings, keep them low. Try to avoid unnecessary final gathering, things like that. It could be very slow. But honestly, well, another thing to consider as well is that if your fluid is very thin, okay, if it has a lot of opacity, not that much opacity, you can see through quite a bit. It could get slow to render as well. Thin volumetrics are a bit slower to render, especially when they're layered. When you have a lot of depth in your scene, it could get a bit slow. As opposed to a fluid with an opacity of 1, for example, is a lot easier to render, a lot faster because there's less things to go through for the ray to render. So that is another thing to do, another thing to keep in mind. But don't be surprised if a simulation of let's say, I don't know, 15 million voxels, 20 million voxels will take you probably, it could take easily 2 hours to render per frame, maybe. Okay, and I understand how the frustration will come at home, because let's say you have 100 frames to do. That means that you can only do 12 frames a day. That's going to take you about 9 days, right, to go over 100 frames. It sounds like a lot and it's a pain in the ass, and I agree. But you have to keep in mind that when you do this for real, you're starting to get paid for this. You will have a render farm to your disposal. So something that will take 9 days at home, it will take 2 hours in a big studio where you get 100 machines at once. Right? So it takes a little bit of time, but I can guarantee you that all the other systems, all the other softwares won't be much faster. It's just the same thing. Right now, I did 17 frames in about 10 minutes, probably, right? That I've been talking about this part. Let's hit render, okay, and let's see how long it takes. I like to do, the way I like to do these things is I like to simulate and render at the same time. Sometimes if I'm sure, or if I'm almost sure and I have a bit of time to spare, I prefer to do that, because that means I set up my scenes during the day, and then at nighttime I go to sleep and I hit render without caching. That way, let's say that my caching will take, in your case, Darius, if you're saying it takes 8 hours, then you have to wait 8 hours before you can render if you want to cache it. So it's not really recommended. So I would prefer, for example, if I know it takes 8 hours, then get a good night's sleep. Get 8 hours of sleep, and that's good. By the time you wake up in the morning, you have a full render of your simulation. If you have to render it multiple times, then yeah, it's better to cache it. But if you're testing things and you want to know what they look like, you don't need to cache first and then render, because it takes too long. So here we go. I did 12.5 million voxels. Is rendering now. It's RenderMan. Yes, it takes 1 minute. Let's compare it just speed-wise. Okay, I'm not talking about look. What the hell is wrong with my computer? Let's compare it with Mentor Ray and try it now and see what it does. But the whole Prometheus, I think out of all the renders you guys have to do in this level, the Prometheus renders will be the longest ones to take, because you have the holdouts for the ship, and it's a thin dust, so it can get expensive. The rendering for the fire shouldn't be too long. But simulation, yeah, I'll take a look at their scene and see what's going on. Let's see how long it takes for Mentor Ray to do it, just so you can compare a little bit. I think RenderMan is much faster than what Mentor Ray can do. So something to keep in mind. In the meantime, while this is going through, then I'm going to talk today a little bit about presets. We'll talk a little bit about 2D fluids, something we haven't seen, and I know you're wondering about the resizable containers, the auto resize. It's a very popular setting. So, yeah, this is taking an awful long time. Momentarily, you can see it already. Oh, it's starting to render. That's good. So, I don't even know if the render actually takes into consideration the all the steps that it does before on the time. I mean, like, I don't know if it counts. You start counting the clock when you hit render or when it starts actually rendering the image, because the whole translation takes quite a bit of time. So obviously much slower than RenderMan. So I'm gonna wait for this one frame and that's it. I'm gonna move on to the next topic. I don't want to see, well, frame by, let's see if anything new here going on. Okay, no. Any questions about fluids? Okay, just put them in here today and then let's try to clear them. Oh, okay, so we can probably move to other things next week, Encloth, for example. So, okay, yeah, sorry, right there, you had a question, I completely missed it. Yeah, what exactly make the jitter in the emitter? You know what? The jitter, basically, are you taking RealFlow? Any of you taking the RealFlow class? But if you are, then you'll understand it better if I put it this way. But the jittering is taking the position. At the end of the day, fluids are, if you go into wireframe mode, okay, you will see them as particles. I don't know if you tried that before, but if you grab a fluid container with density inside and you go into wireframe, you will see particles inside. The jittering is basically, instead of that emitter pumping the particles in the same position every frame, if you jitter it, it will basically move them, offset them a little bit, their positions. So it gives you a bit of a more random distribution on the emission. It's not very, I never think of it, honestly, to either use it or not, because it's, for fluid, it doesn't seem that relevant. On a case, for example, if you were taking the RealFlow course, you will see that the emitters on RealFlow have an attribute called jitter, exactly the same. And what it does is, like that's the easiest way to see it, very clear. If you have jitter off, you get straight lines out of the emission, almost like grids. If you turn the jittering off, is randomizing their positions. So pretty much, yes. Not in terms of, don't think of it that there is saying it makes it more like a non-uniform emission. That's correct. But don't think of it as in terms of velocity. It's just positioning of the initial values of emission minus the velocity. For the velocity, you do have turbulence and things like that will help you. That's why, for example, the jittering attribute on the fluid on its own, I don't find it that useful, because you do have turbulence and you have turbulence on the container and the emitter. You have swirl. There's so many things going on. So, but yes, in a nutshell, it's just breaks up the emission, makes it more random. The jitter value. Awesome. Well, this is proving the Mentor Ray, as you can see. Okay, so if you can get your hands on RenderMan, please. I think it's an obvious choice. It looks. In most cases, if you know how to use RenderMan, it looks much better, of course. If you don't know how to use them well, it still looks the same. So, and it takes a fraction of the time. This is finally coming to an end, this render. Please finish. I can move on. One little grid. Let's finish. It's like a boiling pot of water. The more you look at it, the slower it gets. There we go. All right. So it chugged on in 4 minutes and 47 seconds. As opposed to 1 minute. Okay, and adjusting settings will make it look, pretty much the same. So it's not really a setting thing; it's just the way it thinks of the volumes. So keep that in mind. Render-wise, it shouldn't take you more. This is 12.5 million voxels. Remember, yes, when I have fire covering the entire scene, it will take a bit longer. But just get those. It won't take more than 20 minutes or something on my machine. My machine is a dual. It has 12 cores. Okay, so I don't know how you call it, dual hexa core or something like that. It has 12 cores. So it's a bit faster than other machines, but still, it shouldn't take hours to do. Alrighty, I'm gonna leave the same scene, but I'm gonna obviously reduce the voxel count because that's gonna take too long. I'm going to go into for the sake of this example, just a 1-to-1 ratio, very low res. And I'm gonna talk about resizable containers. I'm gonna make myself a little camera. So far I told you please don't use them, and I stick by it. Try to avoid them as much as you can. It doesn't mean they don't exist. So and they're useful at home. I think if you're doing things at home, that will help a little. So so far we worked with set containers. Okay, the voxel count doesn't change on every frame. I think starting on Maya 2011 or 12, I'm not sure, the resizable container showed up. So the auto resize option does exist. If you turn this on, basically this container is going to adapt its size to accommodate for the density that lives inside. So in a case like this, when the fire is rising, okay, from the bottom to the top, it seems like a viable solution to lower the amount of voxels. The ratio will remain. That is the attractive thing about this. The ratio remains, but you're only chopping off areas that you don't want. Right now we have to anticipate. Okay, in the Prometheus example, all the things we have done so far, we had to anticipate what areas we think are big enough to fit my entire solution. So imagine that this is the Prometheus container looking from the top. Then we had the ship traveling through it, remember? So there was a big, massive waste of voxels. We try to optimize as much as we can by, squeezing in and rotating and, doing a little bit of fiddling with the numbers. But at the end of the day, there is obviously a big waste of voxels, and we know that wasting voxels not only makes the simulation slower, but it can make it look less detailed, right? So we can have the same number of voxels concentrated in an area where it's actually needed and double, triple our resolution, our look, I'm sorry. So that's why auto resize is a very popular setting amongst people. I don't use it that often, but it is quite nice. So what happens? Okay, so basically you have to tell the system if you want to resize the closed boundaries. If you do yes, okay, so right now here you can see that you turn it on and then you have the resize closed. This means that any boundary that you set to something, like for example in my case my closed boundary is the negative y side, the bottom of the container. If I turn this on, it means that container is going to ignore pretty much that boundary and is free to expand in any direction, or resize in any direction, including obviously not only grow but also shrink in any case. So if I wanted to do my fire and I want the fire to don't go below this point and just grow, then I will have to turn this off. I'll show you probably later a different scenario. Then you have also something called resize to emitter, which basically it won't let this container be any smaller than the emitter. That is very handy, okay, very useful. Otherwise, the resizing is based on density. Wherever there's density, the container will accommodate for it. The main issue that you will find with the resizable containers is that the container doesn't have enough time to grow, to fit in things, especially when you're doing explosions or fluids that are moving fast. They don't have enough time to accommodate for the size, and you end up with the same visual effect as if you had the density hitting the boundaries of a static container. In my case, if I were to have my density don't dissipate, for example, or rise too quickly or whatever, to the point where the density just reaches the top of the box and you end up with a render with a straight line cut, it will look exactly the same. So that is one limitation. So you need to think of that. Okay, so resize to emitter is a good option in my case. Resizing stop steps is fine. If you use in stop steps, of course, it will work. It will take that into consideration. Sorry. The max resolution is important. Max resolution. If you think of this, all right, this container is going to start growing, and we know because we talked about it for so long about the ratios of things. So let's say you have a base resolution of 50, a ratio of 1-to-1. It gives me an X amount of voxels, whatever that is. Okay. If this size, for example, because of the need of this container to grow, it goes from 550 to 500, then in all directions, okay, then you will end up with a different ratio. Not ratio, but not the ratio, because the ratio is maintained by the base resolution. But for example, I think I'm not explaining myself correctly here. But let's say that my voxel my container has to resize to a size of 50 by 50 by 50. I think that's a better way to put it. Right now we have this hasn't updated yet, so let me refresh it. Okay, so right now we have 50 by 25 by 10. That's my number of voxels, whatever that number will be. Okay, let's say that this size here, because of the auto resize, has to grow because density happens to be in that axis to 50 units. Okay, now I have 50 by 50 by 25. So my number of voxels grows to maintain the ratio. And if I do the same here, okay, then I have now 50 by 50 by 50. Okay, so this could continue to grow. This could be a problem eventually. Okay, so and it could lead, okay, if you don't set a limit on how many voxels you're happy to take, okay, then this could go into a position where it will crash your scene because the number of voxels will go past what your machine can do. So the maximum resolution is a number that you wouldn't take any more than this on any of the three axes. So think of it that this values of resolution will never go past 200. What happens if the need arises for that? Basically, you start losing resolution on those. So let's say that the size has to grow too much. Your voxels will start getting bigger on that direction if you reach your ceiling, okay, your 200 of ceiling in this case. So you have to guess a little bit what's going to happen. You have to try to guesstimate it, let's say, and change that number a little. Of course, increase it if your machine can handle 40 million voxels or something. Just make sure that you calculate what it takes to reach the limit of your machine. That will be probably the way I would do it. I will say, well, my machine can do, I don't know, let's say 27 million voxels. That is an easy number. That is a 300 on each. Then I will go in here and I'll set my ceiling to 300. That doesn't mean that it will use them all. It will use them if necessary. So just cover your backs like that. If your machine can do, I don't know, a bigger number, then I'll just increase it. Just try to think of the worst case scenario, which is 3 axes with the same value, with the maximum value. That is the worst thing can happen to you. So calculate that and see how much your machine can handle. I think we talked about what the kind of machines can do, what kind of things, and keep that in mind to put that on the max resolution. Then you have a dynamic offset, which is the ability of this. Basically, you can see you have 3 axes, okay, and this is going to grow on all 3. You can offset the boundary, let's say, on one of these axes individually. That's not very important. You can see it's all set to 0. There's no need much. The very important number is this one, the auto resize threshold. This is the sensitivity of the container. I'm going to actually start using it. So I lower my resolution to 50, and I'm going to activate it. And the first thing you do is, is my container shrinks. I'm going to turn the display on because we had it off. Okay, so here's my density. If I rewind, it starts from the position, the size that you created it. So in my case, I'm starting with a base size of this. But then the first frame, it doesn't find any density. Well, it finds a little, but what I'm pretty sure it's doing in this particular frame is just resizing to the size of the emitter. Okay, because I have the resize to emitter turned on. If I turn that off, and if I go from the first frame to the second frame, let's go to the third frame, start to slowly shrink, and then grow again. Okay, you can kind of see what it's doing. So resize to emitter is always a good option to try, because it could happen where if the density was being emitted differently from a texture or something, and it starts on the left side, it could shrink too much and ignore parts of the emitter that are outside. So resize to emitter, if it's important to you to keep at least this size, then turn that on. But you can see the effect, okay? It's very, very clear, okay? So it shrinks. And because of that, of course, this container right now, this one in my screen, is a lot cheaper to calculate than the others. Not because the ratio changed again, but because the size of it, you can see, is smaller. So, sorry, but you cannot really see, that's one thing to mention, right? You cannot really see the size of this container. The size is still being set here, but that's not really the actual size at the moment. But you can kind of get a hint of what's happening because of the resolution values are changing, and that will change every frame pretty much. It's just, you need to deselect it and reselect it to see the update. So you can see that it's changing. 10, 14, 10, and 48. Go one frame forward, reselect it, select it. 11, 10, and 49. So this is constantly changing because the size is constantly changing. So keep that in mind. So for a simulation like this one, a simulation like the Prometheus landing, it could work. Okay, now if you feel like you are able to squeeze all the resolution you can out of a static container, then why not turn them on and use auto resize? Just keep in mind that some of the major studios, and I know because I've been there, they have major issues caching these things and rendering those things. So when the voxel count changes, especially because they use their own formats for caching of fluids. Okay, I'm not saying every studio has a different format, but they do tend to share, between 2 or 3 different formats they tend to use. They are having problems. I don't know. I mean, it can be very frustrating for someone to get used to this too much and then take it away from you. So bear that in mind. So the auto resize threshold is the sensitivity. The lower this number, the more sensitive this container is to resizing, so the bigger the chance you have to fitting everything in. I'm going to go and crank it up to 1. A very bad number. Okay, so this is not very sensitive, so I'm going to have a hard time growing. This doesn't mean that my density is not rising. Okay, you can see my container is stuck at the bottom. Doesn't mean that my simulation is doing that. My simulation is trying to expand, but the container is not sensitive enough to keep up. The more I lower this number, okay, so let's go to a value of 0.1, the bigger the sensitivity is, and you start getting something. But it happens, I paused it in the right frame, which is good. It happens, this situation comes up, okay, where I can see that my density reached the ceiling, and that's not something I'm expecting. I don't want to see this. That could be a problem. When you render, then you will get, I guess I should have switched to, well, it will render quickly. Let's see if it's visible. Sometimes it's very, very noticeable. It's just a sharp line cutting everything. So right now I kind of see something here, but it's very subtle. It could be problematic. So keep this number low. I guess the smaller you go, the slower it gets. I'm not sure, but I'm assuming. Otherwise, why would you put that in there? I will just make it as sensitive as possible. But I'm guessing it has to do with speed. I can kind of see that it's a little bit slower if you lower the number, but you can now fit your density a bit better in all axes. So that is resizable containers. That doesn't go past that point. I'll show you what it looks like without with the resize closed boundaries on. This file will be able to grow if it needs to. You can see now there's no bottom anymore. All 3 axes are free to move. So that's as far as that goes with our resize. Let's see, you guys are doing fine here. Any questions about this part? Anybody? Can just if at least one of you tells me no, then I'll keep moving. All right, cool. No question. Fair enough. I think Dave, you're typing something. All right, you guys are fine. Cool. So that is resizable containers. Now, also it's worth talking about presets. So for that, let's say I'm going to open the fire, the plume of fire and smoke that we did on week 5, I believe. Right. So I'm going to take the scene that I did with you guys. This is where we left it off, whatever that looks like. And I was telling you all these weeks that try to recreate your scenes, okay? But eventually, once you feel good about fluids and you're feeling that you can handle them very well, there's no need for you to begin from scratch every scene you do. So if I were you, I will keep at least starting points of certain types of effects. So dust, fire, smoke, fire with smoke, things like that, okay? I will just keep a starting point. And that's what it's called, a preset in this case. So let's say that you're happy with this one. This is the plume thing that we did. Let's just let it run and see what it looks like. You kind of remember, right? The one that rises and turns to the right. And he has fire at the bottom and smoke on the top. I'm not going to let it run the whole way, but let's say that you're happy with this and you would like to keep this in case you need to do something in the future that kind of looks like that one. Even resembles that a little bit. In terms of the content of the container. Well, I will just grab it and then go to presets, okay? And you're going to save a fluid preset. Let's name this Plume for English course, okay? Save the attribute preset, done. You could do, the concept of presets is not relative only to fluids. Obviously relative to anything. In my, I could grab my emitter and I do also, for example, let's say Plume in English, call it the same, and fine, right? So you go to an empty scene, different day, you have to do, let's say an asteroid or something different, something that will have a bit of the same look, similar look. Then you will basically go to Fluid Effects, create a 3D container with an emitter, for example. You grab your 3D container, go to presets, and find what you just made. So it was called Plume in English. And in this case, I'm going to replace it completely. This container, you'll see, takes the size and all the attributes that you had on the previous one and has been translated in here. The only thing that doesn't pass through is expressions. So keep that in mind. But for example, things like the shading, you have like the opacity curve has been made, the incandescence curve has been, all these things that take quite a bit of time to set up have all been created for you. Okay, so any expressions won't work. So for example, under my textures, I usually put an expression on time, and that doesn't pass through. That's the only thing. And you can do the same on your emitter. So grab the emitter, and then go presets, and then grab the plume, replace it, and everything's fine. But the connections to the noise fields didn't go through. So other thing to keep in mind. But all the values will be passing through. At least gives you a better place to begin. And if you hit play on that, this will look, will start to look, the resolution, okay, the base resolution of the container, for what I can see, is not passing through either. So the size passes, but the base resolution doesn't. So keep that in mind. But hey, it's a lot faster, okay? I can just go in now and say, I don't remember what we had, but let's say 40 and then start from here. And you can see that the most of the work has been already cut out for you. So that's presets. Very useful stuff. And there are many presets already made for you on the fluid menu. If you want to reverse engineer some of these things, by all means, go back in there. What I love about presets, one of the things I love is you can layer and mix different looks. So if you had a simulation of I don't know, fire and one of smoke, you could. It's not that easy. Like you just blend half and half, and it will look half fire, half smoke. But it does a very good interpolation of values in between those looks. It's very useful when we do Encloth next week. You will see it in action. So that's a very good way to get a starting point. So save your presets for fire, smoke, and I'll bring those guys with you to your next jobs, okay? And you will have a lot more time to make the things look awesome by skipping all the boring stuff at the beginning. All the things that I call like the pre-flight check things, that could be easily a preset. Even if you don't want to, that's like a base thing for any simulation. So that could be a preset I could have. I don't do it on the class because I want to show you every week to get the concepts in there, but very useful stuff. So that's another one. I don't see any questions, so I assume there's nothing. I'll keep moving. Next thing I wanted to talk about was the ability that fluids have of being fields, force fields for particles. I'm going to grab, I think, the fire again. So last week we saw particles emitting fluids. Now we're going to see particles being moved by fluids. So I'm going to grab the same fire that we just had right now. I'm going to lower this resolution to a 2:1 ratio. And I'm just going to run it. I'm going to turn the visibility on just so we can see what's happening. Okay, so we have this going on. And I'm also going to make myself a particle emitter. This works with M particles exactly the same way. So create an emitter in there, and I'm going to place it at the bottom and scale it to kind of match a little bit the fluid emitter. I don't have to, but it makes easier example this way. All right, so I got something like that. For now, I'm going to disable my fluid for a second, just so I can take a look at my particles without the other stuff. And let's see. And here we go. We got particles being emitted. I'm going to take the velocity of this emitter off. So the speed, I'd like to do it here. Let's do it there. Speed to 0. So these guys will just be born in that box and stay. Oops, sorry. Speed 0. Sorry, it's down here. So they're away from axis and away from center. There we go. This is the volume emitter. There we go. So we get just particles being born. Then I could use my fluid simulation as a force field for my particles and advect. Okay, when you will hear the particle advection, that's what it means. So you will grab these particles, go to custom. Custom is in my case, but you go to the dynamic relationships, and they will show up. Your fluid container shows up as a force field now. So you will just turn it on like you will turn any other force. And now these particles have the ability to be moved by the fluid. The only thing is, given that the particles have a conserved momentum of 1, these particles are going to be moving like crazy. So, well, first I have to re-enable my fluid, sorry. Turn that back on. And now, I'm going to turn the display of the fluid off. You know what it does already, so I just wanted to show you. And let's focus on the particles. You can even grab this just to make it look better. I'm just going to show nothing. Okay, so it's just the particle emitter. Hit that and we'll see. Let this play a little bit. Okay, let me just make sure that this connection is made. So here's my particles, my fluid. The fact that the particles are not purple, they are purple. Okay, so I wanted to make sure that they were really connected. Let me just double check that. That's fine. Okay. I'm going to move my emitter a little bit bigger because there have to be some sort of velocity and contact of this, of the two items. Okay, of the velocity. Basically, the velocity of the container is going to be passed on to the particles. Let me make sure. Let me just play it back again. Okay, so this is not moving. I want to make sure that my things are in the same plane. Everything is in the same position. Okay, so that's fine with me. Let me just double check the particles conserve is set to 1. So this should be moving. You can check, let's check the velocity of the container. But everything should be alright. It's just, well, the disconnecting and reconnecting will fix it. Velocity drop. Definitely there is a lot of velocity in this container, as you can see. So I'm going to take my particles and disconnect them and reconnect them from that fluid and see if that snaps it out of their funk. And try again. And now it works. Okay, it's just a little glitch. Maybe when I did the connection. This window, dynamic relationships, it's very buggy nowadays. I don't know why. But here we go. So you get something. These particles are starting to move in a weird way. Given there's no other forces, definitely it's the fluid who's causing this. But this is not useful as it stands right now. And it's just because what I was saying, the particles get pushed in one direction that is given by the velocity of the fluid itself. And they don't lose any energy, so they just shoot in that direction and continue to move. Okay, so they're in a vacuum pretty much. If you want to pass on exactly the velocity of the fluid onto the particles and have them move exactly where they're supposed to be moving, then take the conserve and put that to 0. Okay, that way these particles, well, as you might know, because you're on level 2 now, this will mean that particles will only move if there are forces directly affecting them, either force fields or collisions, or an expression that moves the particle around. But otherwise, this particle will stop on their track. Given that there's no other forces, no collisions, nothing else, is only the fluid the one that's responsible for moving them. And now you get a perfect match, let's say. And it is a perfect match to the velocity vectors of this fluid. Okay, so what I'll do is put that to 5. Okay, you can see clearly, okay, that my particles are, well, they're matching the size of this. Now, what happens if a particle gets pushed out of the box or the container? Because it could happen, right? In the edges, okay, it could happen that there's a velocity vector pointing out, and it happens to push that particle. It will stay on the edge. That particle won't move because of the conserve. Okay, we'll just stop on the track. So this is a way, very powerful way, very useful. Okay, as a force field, you can kind of see what I was saying. These particles happen to be pushed out of the container, and they just stop. We'll do in the next week. We'll do another. We'll continue on this and expand on this idea a bit more. But this is definitely a very useful technique. Okay, so the velocity vectors that you can get from a fluid simulation will always be superior to any turbulence field that you can do. So for like ambient motion, tornadoes, and things like that, it probably, especially if you have access to RenderMan, which is particularly good rendering particles. Mental ray will fail miserably, so it's better to do a tornado, for example, with mental ray. Using fluids than using particles. But if you have access to that, probably if it's sand, I used it on Harry Potter 5. At the end of Potter 5, there's this big battle in the atrium, and then the bad guy, Voldemort, or whatever his name is, he vanishes, turns himself into sand in a kind of a tornado fashion. I have the file somewhere, but it will take me too long to find it. I'll find it and show you, but I'm sure you've seen the movie. That tornado of sand, I did those shots, and I used this technique. Okay, so I made myself a bit of a ambient motion with a fluid sim. It's better to do it with particles in that case because it was supposed to be sand, so you want to have some granularity in there, which you don't get with fluids. So I advected my points through that fluid simulation to get the eddies and all the intricate motion. All right, but render them as points. So that is a very, very valid scenario. Like in this case, I could grab my fluid, for example, turn off its visibility completely so you don't get distracted by it. I will even hide its emitter and then just focus on the particles only. Grab this emitter here and crank it up. And run the sim. If you have you seen Tron? I'm thinking the newest Tron Legacy, whatever it's called, the new one. There is a shot inside the house of the guy Flynn, okay, where he has everything being inside the grid. I think they call it, okay, inside the computer system. Everything is very geometrical, and he has a fireplace in that house. Where the fire is rendered, it looks very dotty, like points, like particles. But the motion is the motion of a fire, so making it look kind of like, okay, it's a computer fire, a computer system version of the fire, whatever you want to call it. That is, for example, one application of this. Right now, my fluid simulation is very low res, but if the higher the resolution of the fluid, the more interesting the look of this will be, and it will make more sense to you if I make them streaks as opposed to. Right, so this will make more sense probably visually to you. You have the issue of the particles exiting the container, but you can kind of see here that the motion is very interesting, and to get that with a regular Maya field is not possible. So very useful technique as well. Let me come back in here and see what you guys. Any questions about this part? Anybody? All right, I'll take Claude's opinion as the group's opinion. For some reason, you guys don't like to type. It's always the same guys. All right, cool. All right, thank you. That's good. Good for now. All right, perfect. So advection, I'm gonna explore that a little bit more, I believe, next week. Okay, we're gonna do something very cool. So I'll leave that for now. You can play with that, but very useful effect. Very useful. Technique approach to moving particles around. That's that. And as I will say, the last thing, probably more ideas will come up or more things we'll think of it. But I think with this, we can wrap things up with fluids for now. It's 2D fluids. And 2D fluids are very handy. Don't get me wrong. I just teach you with 3 dimensions because then it's the same thing. Just take one out. That's why I don't spend more than 5 minutes on. Create, for example, a 2D container with an emitter. And this is what 2D fluids looks like. I'm sure you have clicked on that before, just out of curiosity. But as a fluid container, has the same attributes as anything else. The only thing you can probably see here is that on the resolution side is missing one dimension. That makes it, just because it's missing the one dimension, you're only multiplying 40 by 40 in this case, as opposed to 40 by 40 by 40. So the number of voxels is obviously lower. The idea behind this is that as long as the camera doesn't have to rotate around it or something, okay, if it's a view, well, you get the idea, right? A straight view or a side view, something where you don't really care for the depth of that effect. It could be handy to use a 2D fluid. You're saving the whole dimension that you don't need. To use it as a texture, to use it as a force field even, okay, it could be useful, particularly as a force field. That's basically what you do with it. So I think to show you this, I will also show you one more thing for free here, which is, as opposed to that, I'm going to open the visor. So Window, General Editor's Visor, and then in the visor you have a bunch of fluid examples that could help you. I don't think you need the help anymore. We covered so many things already. You know what? I think the visor goes to my second screen, which is off. So give me 1 second to turn that on. And 1 second here that I can seem to be turning this. Okay. Also, the visor has a collection of initial states for fluids. I don't think you need the help to reverse engineer them too much because you already covered a lot of stuff, but it's there for you to take a look. So here is my visor. There we go. And if you go to fluid examples right here, then you have a few things to play with. I'm gonna grab under the, just trying to think here. Example, I'm gonna show you, so from the visor, okay, your middle mouse drag and drop it, like anything else in Maya. I'm gonna keep that guy down here. And this gives you, in this case, the one I drag in is the wind tunnel. And the wind tunnel is using a 2D fluid, as you can see in here. So they evaluate a lot faster. It has a bit of a explanation. When you use them from the visor, they do come with a bit of an introduction. And that's why I'm thinking about the reverse engineering thing. Take a look, and if you find something attractive here that you haven't, that you've been wondering about, use it. I use quite often the clouds setups because that is those are static containers like we saw already, but they have already a whole bunch of values and numbers already set for me. So this could be very handy. Probably all the others, the fire, we already done fires. Probably better looking fires than this ones. But if you're curious about this, by all means, middle mouse drag and drop it. So the wind tunnel. Okay, you just run this. Let me just play it back. Give myself a bit of room. And they're much faster, of course, than regular fluid. But all the rules apply. And you could, because if you see the limitation is only on the resolution, that you don't have access to that third channel. But you could give it a depth, which is an interesting bit. You have a value of depth in here. And if you were to use this as a force field, then the velocity vectors will take that depth. It will look flat, it will look 2D like this one, but then the velocity inside the container, it visualizes like this, but I know for a fact that this could be wider and the particles will continue to move as long as they're inside this box. So it's almost like if you were to grab these velocities and use the depth as well, right? So that is another application. Aside of that, there's nothing else I should say. I mean, about them, because they behave like regular fluids, just like them. Unless you have any particular questions. But aside of that, I think with this bit of info, I think I'm in good shape to wrap it up for fluids. Let's see. Let me come back in here. So, any question? Anything? Do you think of anything, or you feel comfortable with fluids? You guys here in the live session. Anything you think we're missing? All right. Next week I'll show you how to query fluid information from a container and pass it onto a particle, which is very cool. So we'll leave that for next week because that takes a whole hour. So comfortable, beautiful. Well, that's the idea. But obviously, it requires practice. There's still a long way to go, and you guys are on level 2 or level 3. There's still more fluids to talk about. So it's not over, but I think for now, I think we're in good shape. Perfect. So with that, I'm going to then stop this screen sharing.